She had the test in her purse and love in her chest, and she walked into that ballroom ready to change everything. But life doesn't wait for the right moment. In one single second, under 1,000 golden lights, the man she trusted with her entire soul stood in another woman's arms, and he did not pull away. What Amara Bellamy did next would shake the most feared criminal empire in New York to its core. If you've ever loved someone who made you question everything you believed about yourself, stay with me until the very end. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down hard that night, not the soft kind that makes Manhattan look like a movie, the kind that hits the pavement and bounces back up, soaks through your coat before you realize it's happening, the kind that smells like exhaust and wet concrete and something that has been sitting too long in the dark. Amara Bellamy stood beneath the hotel awning in a black dress that cost more than 3 weeks of her old rent, and she held the small paper bag from the pharmacy like it was a live wire. She had bought it 2 hours before the gala, told herself she was being paranoid, told herself it was probably stress, probably the change in schedule, probably anything other than what she already suspected in the quiet of her own body. She had taken the test in the marble bathroom on the 14th floor of the Meridian Grand, standing in a stall that was cleaner than most kitchens she had seen growing up in Flatbush. She had counted the seconds with her eyes fixed on the ceiling tile above her. 2 lines. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She just sat there on the edge of that toilet seat with the test balanced on her knee, and her hands trembling so slightly that someone watching from the outside might not have even noticed. But Amara noticed. She felt every vibration moving up through her palms, through her wrists, all the way into her chest where something had just permanently rearranged itself. She had thought about Jae-min, the way his voice dropped when he was being serious about something, the way he watched her from across a room like she was the only thing worth looking at. She had thought about the morning 3 weeks ago when he'd stood in her kitchen in Brooklyn drinking her bad coffee and said, without any ceremony at all, "I think this is the place I want to come back to, no matter what." She had not asked him what he meant. She had not needed to. Now she stood in the rain outside his gala, the annual event where Jae-min Kwon dressed his empire in expensive suits and charitable donations and called it a night of philanthropy. And she was carrying a secret that changed every single calculation she had ever made about her future. She went back inside. The ballroom was full of the kind of people Amara had spent her whole life looking at through windows. Senators, CEOs, women wearing jewelry that could have paid off her mother's house twice over. Jae-min's legitimate businesses, real estate, hospitality, private logistics, had made him the kind of man that powerful people wanted standing next to them in photographs. And Jae-min knew how to stand in photographs. He knew how to fill a room. She had watched him do it from the beginning, back when she had first been hired to design the floral arrangements for one of his hotel lobbies, and he had walked through her setup without saying a word, then called her the following morning to tell her it was the best work he had ever seen in any of his properties. That was 18 months ago. She found him near the far end of the ballroom, beneath the cluster of white orchids and cascading greenery she herself had installed 2 days earlier. He was wearing the charcoal suit she had helped him choose, the one with the subtle texture that made his shoulders look like architecture. He was laughing at something the man beside him had said, and even from 30 feet away, Amara could see the particular quality of that laugh. The controlled one, the public one, the one that never quite reached his eyes the way it did when they were alone. She started toward him. She never made it. The woman appeared from the left side of the room, moving with the kind of deliberate confidence that does not happen by accident. She was Korean, exquisitely dressed in deep burgundy, her hair pinned back to expose a long neck and earrings that caught the chandelier light with every step. She walked directly toward Jae-min the way a person walks toward something that already belongs to them. No hesitation, no request for permission. Amara stopped. She watched the woman reach Jae-min, watched his body register the approach. A slight turn, a recognition. And then the woman's hand was on his arm, and she was leaning in, and there were cameras around them, real cameras, press photographers who had been circling the room all evening, and the woman turned her face toward Jae-min's and kissed him on the mouth while the flashbulbs went off and the crowd continued to move around them like water partying around stone. Jae-min did not pull away. He stood very still, his jaw tight, his hand not moving to push her back. He let it happen. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Long enough for the cameras to get what they wanted. long enough for Amara to understand that whatever this was, it had not surprised him. She felt the pregnancy test in her purse like it had suddenly tripled in weight. The woman pulled back and smiled at the room. Yamin's eyes moved across the crowd, the automatic surveillance of a man who always wanted to know what was in his perimeter. And for 1/2 second, through the press of bodies and the yellow light, his gaze landed on Amara's face. She did not give him anything to read. She turned around and walked to the exit with her shoulders straight and her chin level and her heart absolutely screaming inside her chest. The cab driver on Fifth Avenue did not ask her anything. She was grateful for that. She sat in the back seat with rain streaking down the window and her hands folded in her lap, and she did not speak for 6 blocks. Then she said, "Pull over, please." And he did. And she got out on a corner she did not recognize with a plastic bag from a midtown pharmacy, and she walked to a trash can under a bodega awning, and she dropped the pregnancy test inside it, pushed it under a folded newspaper, and stood there for a moment with her hand still inside the can, like she was checking to make sure it was really gone. It wasn't gone. She knew that. You cannot throw away a fact, but she could start making decisions. She went back to the apartment Jaemin kept for her on the Upper West Side. The one she had accepted like a fool because she had believed at the time it was love and not investment. And she packed for 3 hours without sitting down. She was efficient about it. She had grown up without much, and she had learned early that you can carry what actually matters if you're honest about what that is. She took her work portfolio. She took her mother's recipe box that she kept on the kitchen counter even though she never cooked. She took the envelope of cash she had put aside over the last 6 months because her grandmother had told her once, very plainly, always keep money that no man knows about. She took her tools, the good shears, the conditioning spray, the small notebook where she kept client notes and flour measurements and ideas she hadn't developed yet. She did not take the coat he had bought her. She did not take the bracelet. She left the second key on the counter by the sink, and she stood at the door for a moment and looked at the apartment and thought about all the mornings she had stood in that kitchen feeling like maybe, for the first time in her adult life, she had chosen correctly. Then she closed the door behind her. She drove 9 hours through the night. She had a friend, Della, who had bought a property upstate near a small mountain town 3 years ago and hardly used it. Amara had called her from a gas station outside of Poughkeepsie, and Della had picked up on the second ring and had not asked a single question except, "Are you safe right now?" When Amara said yes, Della said, "The spare key is under the clay pot on the left side of the porch. I'll call ahead to the propane company." That was the entirety of the conversation. Amara arrived at the cabin at 4 in the morning. She sat in the car for a long time after she turned off the engine. The silence outside was the kind she was not used to. Deep, total, without sirens or foot traffic or the hum of the building's elevator. Just trees and rain moving through branches and her own breathing, which was finally, slowly, beginning to settle. She had not eaten. She had not cried. She had not allowed herself to think too carefully about the face Jaemin had made when he saw her across that ballroom. The expression that had moved across his features in the fraction of a second before she turned away. Something she could not name from that distance and refused to name now. She got out of the car and took her bags inside. The cabin was cold but clean. Della had left a blanket folded on the couch and a box of crackers on the kitchen counter, which meant she had called someone to prepare it. Amara wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a long time. She was 10 weeks pregnant. She had made a rough calculation in the bathroom at the pharmacy before she went to the gala. 10 weeks meant the decision-making window was not infinite. It also meant the father was a man who ran a criminal organization from behind the walls of legitimate business, who had just publicly kissed another woman in front of a room full of cameras, and who did not yet know that any of this existed. She thought about calling him. She picked up her phone and set it back down 4 times. Each time she did it, the reasons not to call felt more solid than the reasons to call. She did not trust what he would say. She did not trust that whatever he told her would be the full truth, because she had learned over 18 months that Jaemin Kwan moved information the way a chess player moves pieces, always 3 steps ahead, always with a strategy underneath the surface. He was not a liar in the way of small men. He was a liar in the way of powerful ones, which is to say, he never said things that were technically false. He simply chose what to reveal and when. And he had chosen not to reveal the woman at the gala, and now Amara had to decide what to do with that. She got into bed at 5 in the morning and stared at the wooden ceiling. In the city, Jamin had been searching the room for her for 6 minutes before he understood she was gone. He had kept it internal, the way he kept everything internal. A controlled tension in the jaw, a deliberateness in the way he moved through the crowd, 2 words in Korean to the man closest to him who immediately disappeared to check the exits. By the time he reached the lobby, the doorman told him a woman in a black dress had left in a cab approximately 20 minutes ago. Jamin stood on the hotel steps in the rain with his dress shirt getting wet and his phone already in his hand, and he called her number. She did not answer. He called 3 more times over the next 40 minutes. He sent a message that said only, "Where are you?" Not a question, a direction. The way he said most things when he was unsettled, flat, stripped of anything that could be used against him. She read the message at 6 in the morning in the cabin. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. By the next morning, she had a plan that was not complicated. She would stay at the cabin. She would think clearly about the pregnancy. She would rebuild her client list remotely. She had been doing most of her sourcing and design work digitally for the past year anyway, and her name in the Brooklyn floral community meant something real that had nothing to do with Jae-min. She would not hide from him forever, but she would decide everything on her own terms before she allowed him back into the perimeter of her life. She did not account for how fast he could move. Back in the city, Jae-min did not sleep. He sat in the office of his apartment on the 43rd floor and worked through the night the way he always worked when something was wrong, systematically, without panic, but with an intensity that the men who worked for him recognized as the most dangerous version of him. He pulled her financial records. He checked her credit card, which she had not used since the gala. He called Della at 8 in the morning, and Della, who had no loyalty to Jamin and no particular fear of him, told him simply that she had not heard from Amara and hung up. He did not believe her, but he filed it. He had 2 men trace the cab. The driver remembered dropping a woman in a black dress on the corner of 57th and 7th, which told him she had gone back on foot somewhere nearby, then presumably found another way out of the city. He checked the car that was registered in her name, a second-hand Civic she had refused to let him replace, and confirmed through a contact in the city that the car had left the parking garage beneath her old apartment building in Flatbush at 11:47 the previous night. She had gone home first. Then she had driven out. He stood at the window of his office with Manhattan below him in the early gray morning, and he understood for the first time that she had not acted in impulse. She had not run. She had withdrawn. There was a difference, and Jae-min Kwon, who made his living by reading the difference between people who were scared and people who were decided, understood exactly what he was dealing with. He had lost her. Not to someone else. Not to accident or distance. He had lost her to a decision she had made with a clear head, and that was a thing that could not be fought the way he knew how to fight. He sat back down at his desk. On the surface of it, next to the untouched glass of water his assistant had left hours ago, was a small piece of plastic he had found that morning when he went to her apartment with his key. She had left so thoroughly that he had almost missed it. The trash under the bathroom sink, where something white caught the light when he opened the cabinet, searching for some sign of where she had gone. He had picked it up without knowing what it was. Then he did know. He turned it over in his hands for a long time. 2 lines. He was still holding it when the sun came up. He did not sleep that night. Not 1 hour. Jae-min sat at his desk until the Manhattan skyline shifted from black to the particular shade of gray that precedes dawn, the kind of light that makes everything look like it is being erased rather than revealed. The pregnancy test lay on the desk in front of him. He had not moved it. He had not put it in a drawer or turned it face down or done any of the things a man does when he wants to pretend something is not real. He left it there, and he looked at it, and he let it mean what it meant. 2 lines. He was 41 years old. He had built an empire from a single decision made when he was 19 in a basement in Queens with his uncle's money and a contact list that most men his age were using for college parties. He had survived things that should have ended him. He had made choices that he did not regret, and choices that he would carry for the rest of his life, and he had learned to separate the 2 categories with the kind of surgical precision that came from having no other option. Regret was expensive. In his world, it got people killed. But sitting in that office in the gray morning with a plastic test on his mahogany desk, Jae-min Kwon felt something move through him that he had no clean category for. It was not guilt yet. It was something older and more physical than guilt. A pressure behind the sternum, a tightening in the throat, the body registering a loss before the mind has fully processed what has been lost. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. He called his head of security, a man named Tae Sung, who had been with him for 11 years and who understood, without needing to be told explicitly, the difference between a situation that required action and a situation that required silence. Tae Sung answered on the first ring the way he always did, no matter the hour. "Find her," Jamin said. "Not a team. You, personally. I want to know where she is before noon." There was a pause on the line, brief, but there. "The florist," Tae Sung said. Not a question. "Yes." Another pause. "Do you want her brought back?" "No." Jamin's voice did not change in volume or tone, but something in the single syllable made Tae Sung go very still on his end of the call. "I want to know where she is, that's all. Don't approach her. Don't let her see you. Don't send anyone she would recognize." "Understood." Jamin ended the call and set the phone down and pressed both hands flat against the surface of the desk. His palms were steady. They were always steady. That was the thing people who feared him never quite understood. It was not that he felt nothing. It was that the fear and the grief and the fury all went somewhere internal, somewhere below the surface, and what came out was always controlled, always calibrated. It was the most useful thing his uncle had ever taught him, and also, he was beginning to understand, one of the most destructive. He thought about the way Amara had looked at him across the ballroom. He had seen her for less than a second before she turned away, but he had seen enough. He knew her face the way he knew the floor plan of every building he owned. He had studied it, mapped it, knew every variation, and what he had seen in that fraction of a second was not anger. Anger he could have worked with. Anger was hot and close and could be addressed directly. What he had seen was something that had already cooled, that terrified him more than anything he had faced in 20 years of running the kind of business that did not appear in tax filings. Amara woke at 9 in the morning to the sound of wind against the cabin windows and the smell of cold air coming through a gap in the frame above the kitchen sink. She lay in bed for 3 minutes without moving, which was something she never did. She was a woman who woke up and started, but her body felt like it had been taken apart and reassembled slightly wrong overnight. Every joint stiff, her mouth dry, a low, persistent nausea that she recognized now as something other than stress. She got up. She drank water standing over the sink and looked out the window at the tree line, which was dense and dark green and absolutely indifferent to everything happening in her life. She appreciated that about trees. They were honest about not caring. She made a list. She did it the way her mother had taught her, on actual paper with a pen, because her mother had believed that writing things down made them real in a way that thinking about them never quite accomplished. The list had 3 columns: immediate decisions, financial, medical. Under immediate decisions, she wrote, "Stay here minimum 3 weeks. Do not contact Jay, call Dr. Reyes. Call Della. Do not call Mother yet." Under financial, she wrote, "Current savings." Roughly annotated the figure from memory. Current contracts. She had 4 clients on retainer, 2 of whom required in-person consultations that she would need to reschedule. Potential remote work. She wrote the number of the floral distributor in the Bronx who had been asking for 6 months if she was interested in a design consulting arrangement that could be done entirely by video and digital markup. Under medical, she wrote only, "Find local OB," and underlined it twice. She did not write Jamin's name anywhere on the paper. She had made that choice deliberately. His name on the list would make him a variable she was accounting for, and she was not ready to account for him. He would appear in every column eventually. She was not so far gone in her hurt that she believed the father of her child was something she could simply categorize under immediate decisions and move past. But not yet. Not today. She folded the list and put it in the front pocket of her work bag, next to the small notebook. Then she washed her face, put on the warmest clothes she had packed, and went outside to look at the property in daylight. The cabin sat at the edge of a small clearing. Behind it, a slope of mixed hardwood fell away toward a creek she could hear but not see. The air was cold and clean in a way that Manhattan never quite managed, even on its best days. She stood on the porch and breathed it in and felt, for the first time since she had stood in that bathroom stall holding a plastic test and counting the seconds, something approaching stillness. She allowed herself exactly 4 minutes of it. Then she went back inside and called her doctor in the city. Taesung was good at his job because he was boring. That was the honest reason. He drove unremarkable cars and wore unremarkable clothes and had the kind of face that people looked at and immediately forgot. He had spent 11 years cultivating this, and it had served Jaemin's interests in ways that the more intimidating members of the organization never could. He could sit in a diner for 3 hours without attracting a single glance. He could ask questions that sounded like small talk. He found the trail through the parking garage first, then the toll records, cash, but the camera at the Tappan Z had caught the plate. Then a gas station outside Poughkeepsie where she had used her phone to make a call, which gave him a cell tower ping that narrowed the geography considerably. By 11:30, he was in a rented sedan on a state route 40 miles north of the city, and by 12:15 he was parked on a dirt road 300 meters from a cabin where a dark blue Civic was sitting in the gravel driveway with Brooklyn plates. He called Jaemin. "Found her." He gave the address, read it off the property records he had pulled while he sat in the car. "She's there. Car's in the drive. Lights are on inside." Silence on the line, longer than Taesung expected. "Is she alone?" "Far as I can tell, no other vehicles." Another silence, then, "Come back." Taesung blinked. "You don't want me to "Come back," Jaemin said again in the same flat tone. "Thank you." Taesung sat in the car for a moment after the call ended. In 11 years, he had never heard Jaemin say thank you to him directly for a task. He had thanked him obliquely, through compensation and trust, and the kind of steady employment that meant Taesung's family had a house in Bergen County and his daughter was in a good school. But not like that. Not quietly. Not like a man who had just been handed something fragile and was trying not to drop it. He turned the car around and drove back toward the city. Jaemin left 2 hours later. He drove himself, which he almost never did, in the black Range Rover that he used for private travel rather than the car with the driver that he used for business. He told no one where he was going. He had spent 40 minutes standing in his bedroom trying to decide whether to bring anything. Flowers seemed obscene given that she was a florist, and anything else seemed calculated, and calculation was the last thing he could afford with her right now. He brought nothing. He drove north on the highway with the radio off and his phone in the cup holder, and he thought about what he was going to say. He rehearsed it once and then abandoned the rehearsal because every version of it sounded like a man managing a situation rather than telling the truth. The problem was that Jaemin had spent so long treating truth as a resource to be deployed strategically that he had lost the muscle memory for saying it plainly. He knew this about himself. He had known it for years and had considered it mostly an asset. The road curved north into trees. The rain from the night before had left the asphalt dark and the shoulders soft. He drove too fast through the first set of curves and then deliberately slowed himself down because he recognized the speed as urgency he had not earned, and urgency with Amara right now would be exactly the wrong move. He found the road from Taesung's description and the cabin at the end of it, and he pulled up behind the Civic in the gravel driveway and turned off the engine and sat there. The front window had a light on. He could see the shadow of movement inside. She was in the kitchen, or near it. The porch light was off. The surrounding trees made the early afternoon feel darker than it was. He got out of the car. He had taken 4 steps toward the porch when the front door opened. Amara stood in the doorway in jeans and a heavy sweater, her hair pulled back from her face, and she looked at him with an expression that was entirely level. Not surprised, not cracked open by the sight of him, which was what some part of him had been counting on without admitting it. She had known he was coming, not him specifically, but she had known that someone would come, because she understood the reach of what she was dealing with, and she had spent the last hour after seeing the unfamiliar car on the road preparing herself for this exact moment. "You need to leave," she said. Her voice was not raised. It was worse than raised. It was the voice of a woman who had said everything she intended to say internally and was now operating only on what remained after that. Jaemin stopped at the base of the porch steps. He put his hands in his coat pockets and looked up at her. He was aware that standing below her was a posture that conveyed a particular thing, and he stayed in it deliberately. He did not try to ascend the steps. I'm not here to bring you back, he said. Then why are you here? Because I found it, Amara. She went very still. The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere up the slope behind the cabin, something in the branches shifted and released a scatter of accumulated rain that hit the undergrowth below with a sound like a brief applause. She stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and her jaw set, and he watched the stillness in her face shift through several things he could not name before settling back into that terrible evenness. You need to leave, she said again. I'm not leaving. Jamin, I'm not leaving. His voice did not rise. It just became more fixed, the way weight becomes more fixed when it is pressed down rather than picked up. I will stand in this driveway until you're ready to talk to me. I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to take you anywhere. But I'm not driving back to the city. She stared at him for a long time, the kind of time that would have made most men look away or fill the silence with something. He didn't. He stood in the gravel, and he looked at her, and he waited. Come in, she finally said. Not warmly. The way you say come in to someone who has an appointment you did not make. The cabin's interior was small and organized in the particular way of a person who is using order to manage internal chaos. Her work bag was on the kitchen table next to a notebook and a pen. The couch had a folded blanket on one arm. There was a half-drunk glass of water on the counter and a jacket hanging on the back of the single chair by the window. There was no television. The only sound was the refrigerator and the wind. Ye Min stood just inside the door and looked at the space the way he looked at any space he entered for the first time. Reading it, filing it. He noticed the notebook. He noticed that the pen cap was off, which meant she had been writing recently. He noticed the jacket, which was the heavy canvas one she kept in her car for job sites. She had not been decorating or nesting. She had been working. Of course she had. He sat down where she gestured, on the couch, which put him lower than her as she remained standing at the edge of the kitchen. She crossed her arms over her chest. Not defensively, he thought, but as though she was holding herself in, keeping her own pieces from scattering. Say what you came to say, she said. The woman at the gala, he began. I don't want to hear about her. Amara, I said, I don't want to hear about her. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she pressed her lips together, and he watched her force it back down. Whatever the explanation is, whatever the political arrangement or the strategy, I don't want to hear it tonight. I have been in this cabin for less than 24 hours, and I have made exactly one decision in that time, which is that I am not going to let you talk me out of my own reality using information I cannot verify. So if that's what you drove 4 hours for, you should turn around. Jamin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're right. She looked at him. About the explanation, he said. You're right that it's the kind of explanation that could be true or not true, and you would have no way of knowing the difference, and asking you to believe it is asking you to trust something that I already broke. So I'm not going to lead with that. The room was very quiet. Then what are you leading with? She said. He reached into his coat pocket and set the pregnancy test on the coffee table between them. He had kept it. He had driven 4 hours with it in his coat pocket. She looked at it sitting there on the wooden table. She had thrown it away, or thought she had, and he had found it, which meant he had been in her apartment, going through her things, and she felt the surge of something hot and electric move through her before she recognized it for what it was. Not anger at the invasion, but terror at being known, at being found, at having the one thing she thought she had controlled taken quietly out of her hands before she was ready. You went into my apartment, she said. Yes. With the key I left on the counter. Yes. Her eyes went to the test and then back to him. How long have you had that? Since yesterday morning. You drove 4 hours with that in your pocket. Yes. She uncrossed her arms. She pressed both hands flat against the kitchen counter behind her and leaned back against it and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Her breathing was audible. Not crying. She was not going to cry in front of him. She had made that decision in the parking lot of the Meridian Grand, and it still held. But something was working through her chest that required more oxygen than usual. How far along? Hemin said. His voice had changed. It was quieter, and the control in it had shifted into something more raw, like a building after you have removed the facade. 10 weeks, she said to the ceiling. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. 10 weeks, he repeated, not processing out loud. She could tell the difference. He was holding it, weighing it. You need to understand something, Amara said, and brought her eyes back down to him. I made no decisions in those 10 weeks about what I was going to do. I was taking it one day at a time. And then last night happened, and now I need to make decisions, and I'm not making them with you standing in front of me before I have had any time to think. What kind of decisions? She looked at him very directly. Every kind. Something moved across his face that she had seen only a handful of times in 18 months, always briefly and always quickly suppressed. It was the expression he wore when something got through the exterior. Not pain exactly, but the recognition of pain arriving. He pressed his lips together and looked down at the table and then back up at her. And when he spoke, his voice was level, but something underneath it was not. I'm not going to tell you what to do, he said. No, she agreed. You're not. He stopped, started again. I need you to know that whatever you decide, I'm not gone. I'm not disappearing. Whatever happened at that gala, and I know you don't want to hear it tonight, and I understand that, I'm not going to push it. It does not change what you and I have, what this is. He gestured slightly toward her, toward the space between them. What's already started. Amara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, What we have. Jamin, what we have is 18 months of me not knowing the full picture of your life. 18 months of things explained after the fact. 18 months of you deciding what I needed to know and when. She shook her head slowly. I can't build something on that. Then I'll change it. People say that. I know people say that. He leaned forward, both elbows on his knees, and looked at her without the performance of composure that she was used to seeing. I'm not asking you to believe it because I said it. I'm asking you to let me stay in the same building as this conversation. That's all. Tonight. Just don't make me leave tonight. She thought about it. She thought about the logistics, which were easier to think about than the rest of it. The cabin had a second room with a cot. There was enough food for one more person. He had driven 4 hours, and the mountain roads after dark were genuinely not safe for someone unfamiliar with the curves. She thought about the pregnancy test sitting on the coffee table between them, like a fact that neither of them could put back. The cot in the back room, she said finally. There are extra blankets in the closet. You stay there. You don't come into my room. You don't touch my notebook. And tomorrow morning before 9, you're going to tell me the truth about Sorahan. All of it. Without managing it. Jamin looked at her. Mom. Something in his face settled, like a mechanism finding its position. Okay, he said. And Jamin. She pushed off from the counter and picked up her glass of water and looked at him over the rim. If any part of what you tell me tomorrow is shaped to protect yourself instead of inform me, I will know. And I will not have this conversation again. She went into her room and closed the door. He sat on the couch in the small cabin with the wind outside and the pregnancy test on the table and the weight of everything he had not yet said pressing down on him like a physical thing. And he understood with complete clarity that he was not in a negotiation. He was not in a situation he could leverage or manage or outmaneuver. He was in something he had never been in before. A reckoning that had been earned and a chance that had not. He was still sitting there when his phone vibrated in his pocket. Not a call. A message. From a number that he recognized with immediate and cold precision. The message had 4 words. We know about her. Payman sat very still. He read the message again. Then he looked at the closed door of Amara's room and then at the window facing the dark tree line outside. And the thing that moved through him in that moment was not fear for himself. It had been a long time since Jaimin Kwan had feared for himself, but something far more disabling. He stood up slowly and went to the window and looked out at the trees and the darkness between them. And somewhere out in that darkness, he understood something had already begun to move. 4 words. Jamin read them again in the blue light of the phone screen, standing at the cabin window with the dark tree line in front of him and the sound of Amara's breathing somewhere behind the closed door down the hall. We know about her. He stood there for 12 seconds without moving, which was long for him. He was a man who processed and acted, processed and acted, the gap between the two as small as possible, because in his world, the gap was where people got hurt. But these 12 seconds he allowed himself because he needed to understand precisely what he was looking at before he moved a single piece. The number was not in his contacts. That meant it was a burner, which meant it was intended to be untraceable, which meant whoever sent it wanted him to know they had the information, but did not yet want him to know who they were. That was a particular kind of power play. Not a threat issued from strength, a threat issued from someone who was still deciding whether to use what they had. Testing the water, seeing if he would surface. He did not respond to the message. He locked the phone, put it in his pocket, and stood at the window for another moment. His reflection was faint in the glass, the ghost of his face over the dark trees. He looked at it without recognition, which happened sometimes when the mask had been on long enough that the face underneath stopped feeling familiar. He went to the couch and sat down. He did not sleep. He did not intend to sleep. He sat in the dark cabin with the sound of the wind and the refrigerator and thought through every person who knew enough about him and Amara to send that message. He built the list methodically, the way he had been taught. Start wide, then eliminate. Start with everyone who had ever seen them together in a context that was not strictly professional. Reduce by who had the technical capacity to get a burner number to him without being traced. Reduce again by who had motive. Not general motive, specific motive, rooted in something that had changed recently. By 3 a.m, he had the list down to 4 names. One of them was someone he had trusted for 6 years. He sat with that for a long time. Amara woke at 5:47 to the sound of him on the phone. She lay in bed and listened through the thin cabin wall. Not to the words, she could not make out words, but to the cadence of his voice, which was low and flat and entirely different from the voice he had used in the living room hours earlier. This was the other voice, the operational one, the one she had heard before only in fragments, through closed doors or across rooms when he thought she was out of earshot, and which had always made her feel the distance between his world and hers as a physical measurement rather than an abstraction. She got up and dressed quietly and went to the kitchen and made coffee. She did not announce herself. She moved through the kitchen in the gray pre-dawn and listened to him finish the call and then heard silence, and then the sound of him in the back room, and then nothing. She was on her second cup when he came out. He looked like a man who had been awake for a long time and had stopped trying to look otherwise. His coat was off. His shirt was wrinkled. There was a quality in his eyes she had not seen before. Not exhaustion exactly, but the aftermath of something that had been processed in the dark and had left marks. He looked at her and said, "We have a problem." "We," she said. He pulled out his phone and set it on the table and turned it so she could see the screen. She looked at the 4 words. She read them twice the way he had. She set her coffee cup down with a careful deliberateness that he recognized as the thing she did when she needed her hands to be still. "When did this come?" she said. "Last night. After you went to bed." "And you didn't wake me?" "No." "Why?" "Because I needed to think before I brought it to you, and because you needed to sleep." She looked up from the phone. "That's exactly what I mean, Jamin. Right there. That's the thing I told you about last night. You deciding what I need." He held her gaze. "You're right. I should have woken you." She waited, as though checking whether the acknowledgement was real or strategic. He did not add anything to it, which she noted. "Who sent it?" she said. "I don't know yet. I have a short list." "How short?" 4 people. He paused. "One of them is someone I've known a long time." She looked at him steadily. "Who?" "A man named Park Sung-ho. He's been my logistics director for 6 years. He controls the movement of everything that connects the legitimate businesses to the other side. If he's involved in this..." Jamin stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. "If it's him, then the exposure isn't just about you. It's about the whole architecture. Every protection I have built around the operation would be compromised." Amara absorbed this. "And the other 3 on the list? 2 are low level and don't have the technical capacity to route a message like this without leaving a trace. The 4th is Sorahan." The name landed in the kitchen like something dropped on tile. Amara's jaw tightened. "Of course it is." "I don't know that it's her. I'm telling you who's on the list. You said you were going to tell me about her this morning. Her voice was very even. Before 9, you said all of it without managing it. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He put both forearms on the table and looked directly at her, and she had the impression of a man who was doing something that cost him something real, not performing vulnerability, but actually accessing it, which was different and harder. Sora Han is the daughter of Han Tae-kwan, he began. He runs the Eastern Distribution Network for the Kim Syndicate out of Flushing. 3 months ago, the Kim Syndicate began making moves on 2 of my supply contracts. Not illegal supply, legitimate hospitality contracts, but they're the legal infrastructure I use to move other things, so losing them would be catastrophic. Han Tae-kwan proposed an alliance. His condition was a public association between me and Sora. An association, Amara said, a visible social connection, enough to signal to the market that the Kwan organization and the Han family were aligned. He didn't ask for a marriage arrangement, he asked for optics. And you agreed. I agreed to attend the gala with her present and allow a photograph. A photograph, Amara said. You allowed her to kiss you for a photograph. She escalated beyond what was arranged. Something moved through his voice, not quite anger, but close to it. What was agreed to was a photograph in proximity. She moved on her own, and He stopped. I let it happen. Because there were cameras, and because pulling away would have created a scene that would have undone the entire arrangement, and I calculated, in that moment, that the cost of the scene was higher than the cost of what she did. The kitchen was very quiet. The cost, Amar said slowly. You calculated the cost. Yes. And I wasn't in that calculation. He looked at her. He did not look away. You were. But I got it wrong. She stood up. She picked up her coffee cup and carried it to the sink and stood there with her back to him for a long moment, looking out the window at the trees that were just beginning to separate from the darkness as the sky lightened. She breathed. In and out, slowly. I need you to tell me something honestly, she said, without turning around. Was there anything between you and Sora Han, ever? Anything before the arrangement? No. I need more than no. She approached my organization 8 months ago through her father. Everything between us has been transactional. I have never been alone with her outside of a business context. There's been nothing. He paused. I can document every interaction if that's what you need. She turned around. I don't want documentation. I want to believe the man sitting in my kitchen, and I'm trying to figure out if I can. He held her look. I know. I'm not going to tell you that you can. I'm going to tell you what's true and let you make that assessment yourself. She studied him for a long time. Then she sat back down. The message, she said. What happens if you ignore it? Whoever sent it escalates. Either they go public with information about you, which creates risk for you and for the baby, or they use what they know as leverage inside the organization to undermine my position. If it's Park, he has access to financial routing that could expose the operation to external parties who would use it to dismantle everything I've built. He paused. If it's Sora, her motive is different. She wants either a real alliance or the destruction of whatever keeps me from giving her one. Amara looked at him. She knows about me. Someone does. Does she know about the pregnancy? Gaiman's jaw tightened. The message says her. Not it. Not them. He paused. I think it's just you. I don't think they know about the pregnancy yet. Yet. The word sat in the kitchen between them. How long? Amara said. Before it becomes a liability. Before they find out and use it. He pressed both palms flat on the table. Not long. A week. Maybe less if whoever sent this is already moving. She stood up again. She went to the window again. She pressed her fingers against the cold glass and looked out at the clearing and the trees and the pale gray sky that was beginning to separate into its morning colors. And she thought about her mother's kitchen in Flatbush, and the recipe box on this kitchen counter, and the notebook with the list in 3 columns that she had written yesterday when she thought the hardest problem she was facing was a decision about remote consulting contracts. You need to go back to the city, she said. Amara, not because I'm sending you away. She turned around. Because you need to find out which of those 4 people sent that message before they move again. And you can't do that from a cabin in the mountains. She looked at him steadily. And I need to figure out if this place is still safe for me to be in. It's not, he said immediately. If they know your name, they can find a location. Tae-sung found you in under 12 hours with less information than whoever sent that message might already have. So what are you suggesting? Come back with me. The estate in Westchester, say, not the city apartment. The estate has perimeter security and a dedicated staff, and I can put a medical professional on site, so you're not driving to a clinic alone. She looked at him for a long moment. You're asking me to walk back into your world. I'm asking you to let me keep you safe while you decide whether you ever want to walk into my world again. And that distinction matters to you. Yes. His voice was very quiet. It matters more than anything I've ever said to you. She turned back to the window. Outside, the first real light was breaking over the tree line, pale gold moving through the dark branches. She watched it for a moment, and then she picked up her coffee cup and she said, without looking at him, "Give me an hour to pack." They were on the road by 7:15. Amara drove her own car. She had been clear about that. She would not ride with him. She would follow him. And if at any point the route they were taking felt wrong to her, she would turn off and he would not follow. He had agreed without argument. He drove ahead in the Range Rover, and she followed the black shape of it through the mountain roads while the morning light built slowly across the hills. She drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand resting on her stomach, which she had not done consciously before. She noticed it after several miles and left her hand where it was. She was thinking about the message. We know about her. 4 words, and under them a structure she was only beginning to understand. A world of moving parts and competing interests and carefully maintained power arrangements, and somewhere inside all of it, her own name had surfaced as a relevant piece of information. She had lived adjacent to Jae-min's world for 18 months, had accepted the shape of it without fully looking at the machinery, the way you accept the fact of electricity without thinking about the grid. Now the grid was visible, and she was somewhere inside it. And the thing she felt most clearly was not fear but fury, at herself, for the length of time she had spent not asking the questions she should have asked. They came down from the mountain roads onto the highway just after 8. The traffic was light, and Jae-min maintained a steady distance in front of her. She had her phone on the passenger seat, and she was 3 miles from the highway on-ramp when it rang. Unknown number. She almost let it go. Then something made her pick it up. "Ms. Bellamy." The voice was male, Korean-accented English, smooth in the way of someone who had practiced smoothness. "You don't know me. My name is Han Woo-sok. I think it's important that we speak before you arrive at Jae-min Kwon's estate." She felt every nerve in her body go cold and still. "How do you have this number?" she said. Her voice came out level. She was surprised by that. "I have a great many things," Han Woo-sok said, "which is why this conversation is worth having. I want you to understand your situation clearly before you make a decision that you cannot reverse." Ahead of her, the Range Rover continued at a steady pace. Jae-min did not know she had picked up. She made a split-second decision and did not call out to him on the hands-free. She kept driving and kept listening. "What situation?" she said. "You are approximately 10 weeks pregnant with Jae-min Kwon's child," Han Woo-sok said, as though he were reading from a document. "You recently discovered evidence of his arrangement with the Han family, an arrangement that he did not disclose to you during its negotiation or execution. You left the city in distress, and he followed you, which demonstrates the leverage your position gives you, whether or not you understand that leverage yet." The highway on-ramp passed beneath her wheels. She merged without thinking, automatic muscle memory. "What do you want?" she said. "I want you to understand who Jae-min Kwon is," Han Woo-sok said. "Not who he presents himself to be. Not who he is in a cabin in the mountains trying to recover what he's lost. Who he actually is and what he has actually done." A pause. "Because there are things he has not told you that change the entire picture, and you deserve to know them before you walk into his house carrying his child." She looked at the back of the black Range Rover ahead of her. Jaemin's shape visible through the rear windshield, one hand on the wheel, his head slightly tilted, probably listening to something or running through whatever he was planning for when they reached the estate. "Give me one," she said. "I'm sorry?" "Give me one thing. One thing he hasn't told me. If it's real, I'll listen to the rest." A pause. Then Han Woo-suk said, "Park Sung-ho, his logistics director of 6 years. The man Jaemin suspects this morning of being a traitor." Another pause, and then the smooth voice delivered the information with the particular precision of a man who has been holding it and knows exactly when to release it. Park Sung-ho has been on Jaemin's payroll for 6 years. He has also been in a secondary arrangement with Jaemin for the last 3 of those years, an arrangement in which Park was tasked with monitoring your movements, your phone records, your client visits, your conversations. Jaemin has had you under surveillance since the 4th month of your relationship. She did not make a sound. The highway opened in front of her, flat and gray and indifferent, and the black Range Rover moved smoothly ahead, and she drove behind it in a silence so complete that she could hear her own blood. "He watched me," she said. The words came out very quietly. "Comprehensively," Han Woo-suk said. "He knew where you were every day. He knew your financial movements. He knew when you visited your mother. He knew about the pregnancy before last night, Ms. Bellamy. The test you bought from the pharmacy. The purchase registered on a financial monitoring system that Park managed. Jaemin has known for 4 days." The Range Rover's brake lights flashed ahead as traffic compressed near an interchange. 4 days. He had known for 4 days and had said nothing. Had let her stand in that bathroom and discover it alone and walk into that ballroom alone and walk back out of that ballroom alone and drive 9 hours through the night alone and sit in that cabin for a full day believing she was making decisions in private while he... Her hands tightened on the wheel. She thought about him sitting across from her at the kitchen table this morning. His voice. "I found it, Amara." The pregnancy test placed on the coffee table between them like a confession. The face he had made when she told him 10 weeks. The performance. And it was a performance. She understood that now with a sickness that moved from her stomach upward. Of a man processing information he was hearing for the first time. She had believed him. She had sat across from the man who had been watching her for 3 years, and she had believed him. The exit to Westchester appeared on the sign overhead, 3 miles ahead. Han Woo-suk's voice came back through the phone. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to make your decision with accurate information. If you walk into that estate, you walk into his territory, on his terms, with his people around you. You will not be a guest. You will be managed." A pause. "There is a service exit 2 miles before the Westchester turnoff. A white sedan is parked at the rest stop past the exit. If you turn off there and park next to it, I will ensure you are taken somewhere safe, somewhere he cannot surveil, and you will have time to make decisions that are actually yours." She looked at the Range Rover. She looked at the exit sign. She thought about her mother's recipe box on the kitchen counter of the cabin she had just left. She thought about the notebook with the 3 columns. She thought about the morning she had stood in a hotel bathroom counting seconds, and the moment the 2 lines appeared and the feeling she had in her chest in the immediate aftermath, before anything else had happened. The feeling that was not happiness exactly, but something older and more serious than happiness. A settling, a knowing, an arrival. She thought about a man who had watched her for 3 years and called it protection. And she thought about a man she had never met whose voice was smooth in the way of someone who had practiced smoothness, who had called her private cell phone from an unknown number and offered her safety in a white sedan at a rest stop, and who had information about the father of her child that may or may not be true, and that she had absolutely no way of verifying in the next 2 miles. The exit appeared ahead. The white sedan would be just past it. The Range Rover moved forward at a steady 65 miles per hour, carrying the man who might have watched her for 3 years, or might be the only person on this highway who actually cared whether she survived what was coming. Amara's hands were on the wheel, and her foot was on the accelerator, and she had approximately 90 seconds to decide which version of the truth she was willing to bet her child's life on. She did not take the exit. It was not a decision made from trust. It was a decision made from math. Han Woo-suk's information was specific enough to be real and curated enough to be weaponized, and a man who called a private cell phone from a burner and offered safety in a white sedan at a rest stop was not offering safety. He was offering a different kind of cage. And Amara Bellamy had spent enough of her life recognizing cages by their architecture to know one when it was described to her in a smooth voice over the phone. She let the exit pass. She watched it in her rearview mirror until it disappeared behind a curve, and then she looked at the Range Rover ahead of her and she called Jae-min's number on the hands-free, and when he picked up on the second ring, she said very clearly, "Han Woo-suk just called me." The Range Rover's speed did not change, but she heard the shift in his breathing, brief, controlled, then flat again. "On your cell," he said. "Yes." "What did he say?" "I'll tell you when we stop, but Jae-min," she paused, chose the words. "When we get to the estate, I need you to get Park Sung-ho in a room, in front of me, and I need you to ask him directly whether he has been running surveillance on me, and I need to watch his face when you ask." 3 seconds of silence. "You already know," Jae-min said. "I know what Han Woo-suk told me. I don't know if it's true, and I'm going to find out the same way I find out everything, by watching what happens when the question lands." Another silence. Then, "Okay." That was all he said. "Okay." She drove the remaining miles to the Westchester exit behind the black Range Rover, and she kept her hand on the wheel and her eyes on the road, and she did not cry, and she did not shake, and she did not let herself feel any of the things that were stacked up behind her sternum, waiting for a moment of weakness to break through. Not yet. Later there would be time for the falling apart. Right now she needed to be every hard thing she had ever taught herself to be. The estate was not what she had imagined. She had pictured something ostentatious. A man like Jae-min, she had assumed, would want his private space to announce itself. Instead, the property was understated in the way of serious old money, a converted stone manor at the end of a half-mile private drive, surrounded by mature oaks, and a perimeter that was invisible until you understood what you were looking at. The slight angle of the cameras in the trees, the groundskeeper's vehicle parked at an interval that was not random, the way the gravel was raked clean in a pattern that would show footprints. Jae-min was out of the Range Rover before she had fully stopped. He came to her door and opened it, and she got out without taking the hand he offered. He did not react to that. He stood back and let her look at the property, and she took 30 seconds doing it, getting her bearings, mapping the exits the way he had probably been doing unconsciously since childhood. "Park," she said. "He's in the city. I'll have him here in 2 hours." She looked at him. "You called him already?" "In the car. After you told me." He paused. "I told him there was a logistics issue that required his physical presence. He doesn't know what it's about." She nodded once and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the estate was warm and spare, staffed by 3 people she was introduced to by name: a housekeeper named Mrs. Cho, a security coordinator named Ren, who wore his efficiency like a second skin, and a woman named Dr. Lim, who Jae-min introduced simply as available if you need her, and who Amara understood immediately was the medical professional he had mentioned. She acknowledged each of them with a nod, and did not perform warmth she did not have, and they were professional enough not to require it. Jae-min showed her to a room on the 2nd floor. It was large and quiet, with windows facing the east garden, and a bathroom that had clearly been stocked recently, towels still in their folds, soap unwrapped. Someone had put a small vase of white freesia on the windowsill. She looked at the freesia for a long moment. "I told Mrs. Cho you worked with flowers," Jae-min said from the doorway. She thought, "It's fine," Amar said. "Thank you." He stood in the doorway for a moment. "Park will be here by 11. Do you want to be in the room when I talk to him?" "Yes." "It may not be. I know what it may not be." She set her bag down on the chair by the window and turned to face him. "I'm going to be in the room." He looked at her steadily. "Okay." She turned back to the window. "Close the door on your way out." He did. Park Sung-ho arrived at 11:17. Amara heard the car on the gravel from her room, and she was already downstairs, standing in the hallway outside the study, when Jae-min came to get her. He looked at her, took in the fact that she had changed clothes, that she was standing straight with her arms at her sides, that her face was the particular kind of compose that precedes something irreversible. And he opened the study door without speaking. The study was a room that Jamin used as an actual workspace, not a performance of wealth, but a functional space. 2 long tables covered in documents, a whiteboard on one wall with organizational charts in marker. Park Sung-ho was already inside, standing near the window with his coat still on, which meant he had not been waiting long and had not been invited to make himself comfortable. He was 53, compact, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the slightly distracted expression of a man who was running through plausible reasons for why he had been summoned here on short notice. When Amara walked in behind Jae-min, something in Park's expression shifted. Not dramatically. He was too practiced for dramatic. But something recalibrated behind his eyes, and she caught it, the way she caught the slight adjustment a room made when a draft came through a gap that hadn't been there before. "Sit down," Jae-min said. Park sat. He looked at Amara once, then back at Jae-min. "What's the situation?" "I'm going to ask you something," Jae-min said. He remained standing. He did not pace. He was not a pacer, but he stood with a stillness that was more pressurized than movement. "And I want you to answer it once, directly, before you decide how to frame anything." Park waited. "Have you been running a surveillance operation on Amara Bellamy?" The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. Amara counted them. She watched Park's face move through the 4 seconds in a way that told her everything she needed to know before he opened his mouth. The brief calculation, the assessment of what Jae-min already had, the decision about how much to concede. "I've been monitoring her security environment," Park said, "on your standing instruction." Jae-min said nothing. He waited. "You asked me 3 years ago to ensure that anyone in close proximity to you was not a liability," Park continued, and his voice was steady, but his hands, Amara noted, were still on his knees in the particular way of someone pressing down to keep them from moving. "I interpreted that instruction to include ongoing monitoring of Ms. Bellamy's movements and communications, given the nature and duration of your personal relationship with her." Amara spoke for the first time. "My communications." Park looked at her. "Email and phone metadata, not content." "You're drawing a distinction between metadata and content as though that makes it something other than what it is." Park looked back at Jae-min. "I was operating under a standing security directive." "Did I give you a specific directive about her?" Jae-min said. His voice was very quiet. A pause. "The directive was general. I applied it." "That's not what I asked." Another pause. Longer. "No," Park said finally. "You did not give me a specific directive about Ms. Bellamy." The room absorbed this. Amara looked at Jae-min. He was looking at Park with an expression she had never seen on him. Not anger, which she had seen in controlled forms, but something slower and more total. Betrayal was not the right word for it. It was the expression of a man who had built something carefully for years and was now watching a foundational piece reveal itself as compromised, and understanding in real time what would have to be torn down and rebuilt. "The pharmacy purchase," Amara said, 4 days ago. "The financial monitoring system flagged it." Park looked at her. He did not answer immediately. "Did you report that to him?" she said. Park's jaw tightened. "It was flagged in the system." "Did you report it to him specifically?" "Yes." She looked at Jae-min. He was already looking at her. 4 days, she said. "Amara, you knew 4 days ago." Her voice did not rise. It went the other direction, but lower, slower, more deliberate, the way a temperature drops rather than spikes. "You let me stand in that hotel bathroom. You let me walk into that ballroom. You let me drive 9 hours alone at night. You let me sit in that cabin for a day thinking I was making decisions privately." "I didn't know what it meant," Jae-min said. "The flag came in as a pharmacy purchase. I didn't—" "You knew what it could mean. I didn't open it immediately. I had the gala and I—" "Stop." She held up one hand. Not a gesture of emotion, a signal, clear and firm. "Stop explaining the timeline. I don't want the timeline right now." She looked at Park. "Get out of this room." Park looked at Jae-min. "Go," Jae-min said. Park left. The door closed behind him and the study was very quiet, and Jaimin and Amara stood 8 feet apart in the space between the long tables with the whiteboard behind him and the gray morning light through the window behind her. And the distance between them felt like something with physical substance, something you could put your hand through and feel the resistance of. "I need you to hear me say something," Jaemin said. "I'm listening." What Park did was not something I ordered, and the way I received that information 4 days ago, without opening it, without understanding what it was. He stopped, started again. "That's not an excuse. I had surveillance running on the people close to me in a general way, and I did not think carefully enough about what that meant applied to you. And I didn't look at the flag because I was managing 14 other things, and I treated it the same way I treat 100 routine flags. And I was wrong. All of it was wrong." She looked at him for a long time. "What was Han Woo-suk's play?" she said finally. The shift was deliberate. She was done for the moment with the personal reckoning. She was putting it somewhere internal and lockable, the way he had taught her without meaning to, and moving to the problem that could not wait. Jaemin recognized the shift. He accepted it. "He's positioning himself to take my operation," Jaemin said, "not through confrontation. He doesn't have the muscle for a direct move. Through erosion. He finds my vulnerabilities and applies pressure until the structure weakens from the inside. You are the most significant vulnerability he's found because I cannot treat you the way I treat a business problem, and he knows that." "He offered me a white sedan at a rest stop," Amara said flatly. "He thought I would get in. If you had gotten in, I know what would have happened if I had gotten in." She moved to the whiteboard and looked at the organizational chart in marker. "Is this current?" "As of 2 weeks ago." She studied it. She had 18 months of peripheral knowledge about the structure of his organization. Not details, not specifics, but shapes. The names that came up in passing, the relationships she had intuited from watching how he moved through rooms. She had more than she had ever let on, because she had learned early that with Jaimin, appearing to know less than you did was sometimes the only form of privacy available to you. "The Han family's position," she said, pointing to a cluster of names on the right side. "Sora's father. He proposed the alliance." "Yes." "Han Woo-seok. Is he related to Han Tai-kwan?" Jaemin went still. "He's a cousin. Removed. The Han family has internal divisions. Tai-kwan and Woo-seok are from competing branches." He paused. "I didn't connect them completely. I knew Woo-seok was an operator in the extended network, but I didn't—" He stopped. "He's using Sora's family connection to get close enough to move against you," Amar said. "He's not working with her father. He's working around him. The alliance Sora's father proposed was legitimate from his perspective. Woo-seok is running a separate play inside it." Jaemin looked at her steadily. "I had 18 months to watch how you operate," she said without inflection. "I paid attention." The door opened. Ren stepped in, and the quality of his movement, quick, contained, told them both before he spoke. "We have a problem at the Meridian Grand," Ren said. "Someone accessed the server room on the logistics side. Financial routing data. The access was keyed to a credential that belongs to Park Sung-ho." Jaemin turned. "When?" 7 minutes ago. It's still active. Shut it down. If we shut it down, we lose the trace. Whoever's pulling the data will know we found them and disconnect." The room went very still. Jaemin stood at the center of it, and Amara watched him process. Not slowly, the opposite of slowly, everything moving at once behind the surface. And then he said, "Let it run. 20 minutes, then cut it. Trace every endpoint it touches." Ren nodded and was gone. Amara said, "He's not in the city." Jaemin looked at her. "Park, he left here 20 minutes ago. He can't be at the hotel." She paused. "Someone is using his credential remotely, which means either Park gave his access to Woo-seok's people before he came here, before you called him, or someone else in your organization is using Park as cover." Jaemin said nothing for 3 seconds. Then he said a name in Korean, low, flat, and with a specific quality that she had never heard in his voice before. She didn't know the name, but she knew the sound. "Who is that?" she said. My financial director, Kim Jae-won. He pressed both hands against the table. He has been with me since the beginning, before Park, before everything. He stopped. He was my uncle's man first. And your uncle? Jaemin looked at her. My uncle has been retired for 9 years. I bought out his position. He has no operational involvement. Does Woo-seok have a connection to your uncle? The silence that followed told her everything. I need to make a call, Jaemin said. Make it in here, Amara said. He looked at her. Then he took out his phone and made the call in front of her, which was the first genuinely unguarded thing she had seen him do in 4 days, and she stood by the whiteboard and listened to him speak in Korean to someone on the other end. Short sentences, flat, stripped of everything except the essential. And when he ended the call, his face had the quality of concrete setting. My uncle has been meeting with Han Woo-seok for 3 months, he said. Through an intermediary. My financial director has been routing small amounts, nothing that would flag on its own, into a holding structure that Woo-seok controls. How long has Kim Jae-won been doing it? At least 18 months. He looked at the whiteboard. Since before you and I... He stopped. 18 months, the exact length of their relationship. Amara felt the shape of it click into place, not dramatically, not with the shock of something sudden, but with the dull and nauseating clarity of understanding that what she had thought was her private life had been someone else's operational timeline. They waited, she said. They let the relationship develop, let it become significant enough to use. That was the strategy. Yes. And the gala, Sorahan and the photograph. Woo-seok told Sora to escalate. She didn't know she was being used. She thought she was securing the alliance her father wanted. Jaemin's voice was very flat. Woo-seok needed me destabilized. He needed you to leave. He needed me distracted and emotionally compromised while his people moved on the financial infrastructure. Amara felt something cold settle over her with the thoroughness of water finding level. She had left that ballroom in tears she had refused to shed, had driven 9 hours alone at night, had sat in a cabin believing she was making independent choices, and every movement she had made had been anticipated, had been, in some sense, engineered. He needed you chasing me, she said. Yes. So that your eyes were off the operation. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He's going to be disappointed. Jaemin looked at her. She turned to face him fully. Her voice was level and her hands were steady, and she had the particular look of a woman who has just walked through the hottest part of something and come out on the other side with her eyes still open. He built a play around what he thought I was to you, she said. A vulnerability, a distraction, a woman who could be used to pull you out of position. She paused. He didn't account for the possibility that I would understand the structure of his play, or that I would decide to be something other than what he designed me to be. Jaemin stood very still. What are you saying? He said. I'm saying we have 17 minutes before Ren cuts the server access and Woo-seok knows we've found the trace. She looked at the whiteboard. And I'm saying I know something that you don't, because Han Woo-seok told me things on that phone call that he would only tell someone he intended to control, which means he told me more than he should have. And I have an idea. She looked at Jaemin directly. But you have to tell me everything first. Not managed, not curated. Every piece of what your uncle knows, what Kim Jae-won has moved, and what Woo-seok's endpoint is. All of it. Right now. Jaemin looked at her for a long moment. This woman he had watched without her knowledge, had lied to by omission for 18 months, had driven 9 hours through the night for, had sat in a gravel driveway for, had carried a pregnancy test across the state for in the pocket of his coat, and he made a decision in that moment that was different in kind from every other decision he had made in 41 years. He sat down across from her, put both hands flat on the table and started talking. He told her everything. It took 11 minutes. When he was done, there was 1 minute left before Ren would cut the server access, and the room was full of the weight of every truth he had just spoken, and Amara was looking at the whiteboard with something moving behind her eyes that was not forgiveness and was not trust and was not love, not yet, but was the beginning of something that could become all three if the next hours didn't destroy them first. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. And in the control room down the hall, Ren's hand was already moving toward the server cutoff switch, and somewhere in the city, Han Woo-sok was watching data flow through a dead man's credential and believing he was 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. And outside the estate's windows, the afternoon light was falling through the oak trees in long, pale columns. And Jae-min Kwon, who had spent 20 years being the most dangerous man in any room he entered, leaned forward and listened to the woman across from him tell him exactly how they were going to end this. And for the first time in his adult life, he did not try to improve upon the plan. Amara's plan was not elegant. That was the first thing Jae-min noticed about it, and it was the reason he believed it would work. Elegant plans belong to people who had time and distance and the luxury of controlling all the variables. What she had built in 11 minutes, standing at a whiteboard in a room that smelled like old paper and marker ink, was something rawer and more honest than elegant. It was a plan built from the exact shape of the trap that had been set for them, using the trap's own architecture against the man who designed it. She had explained it without theater, no raised voice, no grand gestures. She stood at the whiteboard with the marker in her hand, and she laid it out in the same methodical way she planned a large installation. Start with what you have, work outward from the center, don't add anything that doesn't serve the structure. Han Woo-sok had built his entire play on a single assumption, that Amara was a passive element, that she was the stone in the road, not the hand that placed it. He had engineered a situation where Jae-min would be emotionally destabilized and operationally blind, chasing a woman across state lines while Woo-sok's people moved through the financial infrastructure like water through a cracked foundation. What he had not accounted for, what he could not have accounted for, because it required knowing Amara in a way he had only studied from the outside, was that the woman he had tried to use as a lever was also the only person in this situation who had spoken to Han Woo-sok directly, who had heard his voice, who knew the specific things he had chosen to reveal, and more importantly, the specific things he had chosen to withhold. He had told her about Park's surveillance operation. He had told her about the pharmacy flag. He had told her that Jae-min had known about the pregnancy for 4 days. What he had not told her, what he had conspicuously left out, was anything about Kim Jae-won. He had offered her the story of Park as the traitor and Jae-min as the surveiller and himself as the rescuer, and he had left Kim Jae-won entirely out of the picture, which meant Kim Jae-won was the piece he was most invested in protecting, which meant Kim Jae-won was not just a financial director who had been skimming into Woo-seok's holding structure for 18 months. He was the center of the operation, the access point, the reason everything else had been constructed, the alliance with Sora's father, the photographs at the gala, the burner phone call on the highway, was to give Kim Jae-won enough time and enough cover to complete whatever the financial operation was actually building toward. "He's not trying to take your organization," Amara had said, standing at the whiteboard. "He's trying to own it. Kim Jae-won has been moving money into a structure that Woo-sok controls, but the structure isn't designed to enrich Woo-sok. It's designed to create legal leverage. If enough of the Kwon organization's revenue has been routed through Woo-sok's holding companies, then Woo-sok can establish a creditor position. He's not going to attack you. He's going to foreclose on you." Jae-min had been very still when she said it. "A corporate takeover," he said. "Dressed up in criminal architecture, yes." She had put the cap back on the marker. "And the reason he needed you distracted and off balance was not just so you wouldn't see the financial movement. It was so that when you finally did see it, you would already be in a position where fighting it publicly would expose more than it protected. He needed you to have personal vulnerabilities he could point to. A pregnant woman you'd driven across state lines. A surveillance operation you'd been running on your own partner. A kiss at a gala you'd allowed for political reasons." She had looked at him levelly. "He was building a file, Jae-min, not to blackmail you, to make sure that when the creditor position was established, you would choose to walk away rather than litigate it somewhere that would expose everything else." The plan she had proposed was simple in its bones and dangerous in its execution. They would let Woo-sok believe the server trace had gone undetected. They would use the 17 remaining minutes of access to allow Kim Jae-won's credential to pull one final document, a document that Jae-min would prepare in the next 6 hours. A financial summary that appeared to show the full extent of the routing operation, numbers that would confirm for Woo-suk that his creditor position was secure and that the final transfer could proceed. The document would also contain, embedded in the routing data in a way that would not be visible without forensic accounting, a thread, a single traceable transaction pathway that led not to Woo-suk's holding companies, but to a financial crimes unit that Jae-min had cultivated a relationship with over 8 years of careful, quiet cooperation. "You have a federal contact," Amar had said. Not a question. "Yes." "Have you used it before?" "Twice. For situations that were worse for everyone if they became public. Call them now, before Ren cuts the access. Tell them to watch the thread." He had looked at her across the table for a moment that was not long in actual seconds, but felt longer. The moment where a man who has spent 20 years being the smartest person in every room he entered fully accepts that he is not the smartest person in this one. Then, he had picked up his phone. The next 6 hours were the kind that aged people. Jae-min worked at the long table in the study, while Amara sat across from him and reviewed every document he prepared before it went anywhere, which was not something he had asked her to do, and not something she had announced she would do. She had simply positioned herself with access to the work and applied the same quality of attention she gave to every detail-oriented task, and he had not told her to stop. Dr. Lim brought food at 2 in the afternoon that neither of them ate immediately, and both of them ate eventually, standing at the table without sitting down, because sitting down felt like a gear change neither of them could afford. Tae-sung arrived at 3, and Jae-min briefed him in the hallway in 4 sentences, and Tae-sung's face went through several things quickly before settling on the focused blankness that meant he was already working the problem. He left again, immediately. Park Sung-ho had been moved to a room on the ground floor with Ren outside the door. Not detained in any formal sense, but not going anywhere. At 4 o'clock, Jae-min went in to see him alone. He was in there for 22 minutes. When he came out, his face was the closed, concrete expression she associated with decisions that had been made completely and would not be revisited. "What happens to him?" she asked when he came back to the study. "He retires," Jae-min said. "Immediately. Fully. He loses the pension arrangement, but he keeps the Bergen County house and his daughter's school tuition through graduation." He sat down. "He cooperates fully with documenting the surveillance operation, which will be shut down entirely. Every record destroyed, every file." He looked at her. "That includes everything related to you." She looked at him steadily. "Why does he keep the house?" "Because he has a daughter and a sick wife, and because what he did was wrong. But it was done under a general directive I created and did not examine carefully enough. And I'm not going to destroy a family to prove a point about accountability when the accountability that actually matters is mine." He paused. "If you think that's wrong—" "I don't," she said. "I think that's the most honest thing you've said about yourself since you walked into that cabin." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, just a small recalibration, the way a compass needle settles. "The document is ready," he said. "Ren is going to allow Kim Jae-won's credential to access it through the back channel at 6 o'clock, which means Woo-suk will have it by 6:30 and will likely initiate the final transfer within the hour. And your federal contact is watching the thread, has been since 3. He paused. "When the transfer initiates, it will route through the pathway in the document and trigger an automatic flag and a monitoring system that has been dormant for 2 years waiting for exactly this kind of creditor manipulation scheme. Woo-suk's holding companies will be frozen within 24 hours. Kim Jae-won's access across the entire financial structure will be revoked simultaneously. And Kim Jae-won himself." Jae-min's jaw tightened. "He is 61 years old. He was my uncle's man before he was mine, and I gave him the same trust I gave my uncle, and he used it to help someone dismantle what I built over 20 years. He was quiet for a moment. "He will be removed from every position. The federal contact will handle the rest. I will not obstruct it, and I will not protect him." She heard what that cost him to say. She did not pretend it didn't cost him anything, because that would have been its own kind of cruelty. "Your uncle," she said. "I'll handle my uncle separately." His voice closed slightly on the subject. "That's not a conversation for today." She accepted that. "Sora Han." Sora was used by Woo-suk the same way he tried to use you, through different means and with different expectations, but the structure was the same. She was told what she needed to hear to move the way he needed her to move. He paused. I'm going to contact her father directly. The Han family's branch that Woo-sok belongs to is going to be significantly diminished after tonight. Han Tae-kwan will understand what that means for his family's position. The alliance he proposed is dead, but I'll give him a clean exit if he distances himself from his cousin completely and permanently. And Sora herself. Jaemin looked at the table. She kissed me at a gala because a man she trusted told her it would secure her family's future. She didn't know about you. She didn't know what she was participating in. He paused. She deserves to know the truth about what Woo-sok used her for. I'll make sure she gets it. Amara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You've thought about her fairly. I've tried to think about everyone fairly today. His voice was dry, but not defended. I'm aware that's not my historical strong suit. The clock on the wall read 5:42, 18 minutes before Ren would allow the credential access. At 6:03, Kim Jae-won's credential accessed the document. At 6:29, Woo-sok's system received it. At 7:11, the transfer initiated. Ren tracked it in real time from the security room, and Amara and Jae-min sat in the study and waited, which was the hardest part of all of it, the waiting, with the plan already in motion and nothing left to control or adjust. Just the terrible stillness of having done everything you can do and now having to let the world respond. At 7:40, Ren came to the door and said, The flag triggered. Jaemin closed his eyes for 2 seconds, opened them. Confirm. Confirmed. The monitoring system logged the pathway, holding companies flagged across 4 jurisdictions. Ren paused. It's done. Jaemin nodded once. Ren left. The study was very quiet. Amara sat across from him with her hands folded on the table, and she looked at the space between them. Not at him, at the space. And she breathed slowly and let the last 24 hours begin to settle into something she could hold without it breaking her hands. It's not over, Jaemin said. There will be secondary problems. Woo-sok will try to maneuver before the freeze is complete. My uncle will need to be addressed. There are people in the organization who were aware of what Kim Jae-won was doing and said nothing, and I'll need to find out who they are. I know, she said. And what was done to you? The surveillance, the 4 days I knew and didn't come to you, those are not things that get resolved in one evening because the immediate crisis is managed. I know that too. He looked at her across the table. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across the ballroom 3 days ago, before everything, except that this time there was nothing managed in it. No calculation, no performance of calm over an interior that was actually running at high speed. He just looked at her, with all of it showing, the exhaustion and the relief and the weight of what had been uncovered and the knowledge of what was still ahead. I don't know how to do what you need me to do, he said. The transparency, the not deciding things in advance. I've been operating in one mode for 20 years and it is deeply embedded. I'm not telling you that as an excuse. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know exactly what you'd be taking on if you decided to take on anything. She looked at him for a long time. I know it's embedded, she said. I watched it for 18 months. I know. And I'm not going to tell you right now what I've decided about any of it. She unfolded her hands and placed them flat on the table. I'm not in a place where I can make that decision tonight. I've been threatened and surveilled and moved from a cabin to an estate and sat in a room while you dismantled the architecture of a corporate takeover attempt while I'm 10 weeks pregnant, and I need... She stopped. I need time. Real time. Not managed time. Not time where I'm inside your perimeter while you decide when I have enough information. Okay, well, he said. I'm going to stay here tonight because it's the safest option physically. Tomorrow I'm going to make some calls about my clients and my apartment, and I'm going to see Dr. Lim. And then I'm going to go somewhere that I choose, and I'm going to take as long as I need. Okay? And if I contact you, it'll be on my schedule. Okay? She looked at him carefully. She was checking for the management, the calibration, the subtle shape-shifting of a man who was agreeing in the short term in order to influence the long term. She did not find it. What she found instead was something that looked honestly and without performance like a man who had run out of angles and was simply sitting in the aftermath of that, not comfortably, not gracefully, but genuinely. She stood up. She gathered the papers she had been reviewing and stacked them and set them on the edge of the table nearest him. "Jamin," she said. He looked up. "The man you were at that gala, standing still while a woman kissed you because you'd calculated the cost. That's not the man I want near my child." She paused. "The man who drove 4 hours with a pregnancy test in his coat pocket and stood in a gravel driveway and said, 'I will stand here until you're ready.' That man I don't know well enough yet to make a decision about." She picked up her bag. "Figure out which one you actually are. Not for me, for yourself. Because that's the only version of this that means anything." She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. "Thank you for telling me everything today," she said. "I know what that cost you." She went upstairs. The next morning was clear. October cold, the kind that made the oak trees look like they had been cut from sheet metal. Every edge precise against a sky that was the specific hard blue of a season in transition. Amara stood on the east side garden for 20 minutes before breakfast, in the coat she had brought from the cabin, and she looked at the oaks and the lawn and the perimeter she now understood with her eyes rather than just her intuition, and she breathed the cold air in and let it move through her. Dr. Lim saw her at 9. The appointment was thorough and quiet, conducted in a room that had been prepared with the kind of care that told her Mrs. Cho had been given specific instructions. Dr. Lim was professional and warm in equal measure and did not ask personal questions or comment on the circumstances that had brought them to this particular moment. She confirmed the pregnancy was healthy. She gave Amara information, printed and organized, about what the next weeks would look like medically. She asked if there were questions and answered the ones Amara had without editorializing. When Amara came back downstairs, Jae-min was at the kitchen table with his phone and 3 separate printed documents and a cup of coffee he had not drunk. He looked up when she came in. She looked back. Neither of them said anything about the appointment. He did not ask. She noted that he did not ask and filed it in the category of things she was tracking. "I'm leaving this afternoon," she said. "I'll have the car. I'll drive myself." "Okay." She poured coffee and sat at the opposite end of the table from him, and they both sat in the kitchen with the morning light coming through the windows and the papers between them, and the particular silence of 2 people who have been through something irreversible together and are now in the earliest stage of figuring out what they are to each other on the other side of it. "There's something I want to show you," Jamin said. He pulled one document from the stack and slid it down the table toward her. She picked it up. It was a legal document, short, dense with specific language, clearly drafted by someone who knew what they were doing. She read it twice. It established an irrevocable trust in her name with provisions for the child, managed by an independent trustee, structured so that no changes could be made to its terms without her explicit written consent. It predated all of the last 4 days. The date in the header was 3 weeks old. She looked up. "You did this 3 weeks ago." "Yes." "Before the gala?" "Yes." "Before you knew about—" She stopped. "You didn't know then?" "No, I didn't know." He looked at the table. "I knew that the kind of life I lead creates risk. I knew that you were someone I wanted to protect from that risk, regardless of what happened between us. I set it up because it was the right thing to do, not because I was anticipating anything specific." She looked at the document again. She thought about what he had said the night before. "I'm going to tell you exactly what you'd be taking on." And she thought about the surveillance and the managed information and the 4 days and the gala. And she thought about this document, dated 3 weeks ago, drawn up quietly and completely without telling her, because he had not yet learned how to tell people the things he did for them. She set it back on the table. "You're going to have to learn how to show your work," she said. "I know. Not just do the right thing in secret and hope it gets discovered. Actually show the work. Say the thing out loud while it's happening." "I know." He paused. "I'm aware that knowing is not the same as being able to. I'm aware that's going to be a process and not an announcement." She looked at him. He was not asking for credit. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was sitting in the kitchen with his undrunk coffee and his organizational documents and his uncle's betrayal and 20 years of accumulated hard living showing in the lines around his eyes. And he was being as straightforwardly honest as she had ever seen him, and it was not comfortable for him, and he was not pretending it was. She thought about the freesia on the windowsill of the room upstairs, Mrs. Cho, whom Jaemin had told that Amara worked with flowers, the small gesture made through someone else because he did not yet know how to make it directly. Learning to show his work. She picked up her coffee and stood up. "I'm going to Brooklyn," she said. "My apartment, my studio, my clients. I'm going to rebuild the routine I had before all of this." She paused. "And I'm going to call you in 2 weeks. And we're going to have a conversation about what co-parenting looks like in a situation this complicated, and we're going to have it like two adults who have been through enough to be honest with each other." He looked at her. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And between now and 2 weeks. You don't contact me unless there's a direct security threat. If there's a security threat, you contact me immediately and fully. That's the only exception. He nodded slowly. "That's fair?" "It's not about fair," she said. "It's about what I need to be able to think clearly." She set her cup in the sink. She picked up her bag from where she had left it by the door. She looked at the kitchen one more time. The morning light, the stack of papers, the man at the end of the table who was watching her leave and not trying to stop it, which was the most complicated version of who he was, the one she was not yet sure she could build something with, but was also not yet sure she couldn't. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," he said, and then quietly, "Both of you." She walked out. Months passed, the way difficult months do. Not quickly, not slowly, but with a texture that was different from ordinary time. The kind of months that leave marks you find later, in the way you answer a question or the way you hold a door. Amara rebuilt. She did it with the methodical integrity that was the truest thing about her. She repaired her client relationships, renegotiated her contracts, redesigned the layout of her studio in Brooklyn in a way that made space for what was coming. She saw Dr. Lim every 3 weeks, which meant driving to Westchester, which she did without ceremony, treating it as what it was, a practical decision about quality of care. She talked to her mother finally, on a Sunday afternoon in November, sitting at her mother's kitchen table in Flatbush with her hands wrapped around a mug and the recipe box visible on the counter, and her mother listening in the particular way she had always listened, without interruption, without the face that meant judgment, with the face that meant she was filing everything carefully. Her mother had said at the end of it, "Is he trying?" Amar had thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "I think he is." "That's not the same as succeeding," her mother said. "No," Amar agreed. "But it's not nothing." She called Jaemin at the end of 2 weeks on a Wednesday evening when she had finished a client consultation and the studio smelled like eucalyptus and the cold, and she was tired in the good specific way of work completed. He answered on the second ring, the way he always did, as though he had been waiting without performing waiting. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes. It was not an easy conversation. It had the texture of two people learning a new language in real time, finding words for things that neither of them had needed words for before. Backtracking, correcting, sitting in silences that were productive rather than punishing. He told her what had happened with Kim Jae-won, who had been formally removed and was cooperating with an investigation that would take years to resolve. He told her what had happened with his uncle, a conversation he described in 4 sentences that each carried the weight of something much longer, and she did not push for more because she could hear in those 4 sentences that he had said everything he was able to say about it. He told her that Sora Han had been contacted and had been given the full account of Woo Seok's manipulation, and that Sora had been, in his words, furious in a way that I think she'll be able to do something useful with. He told her that Han Woo-seok's holding companies remained frozen, and that the legal process would dismantle them thoroughly, and that Woo-seok himself had gone quiet in the way of a man who understood that he had played his hand and lost it, and was now calculating what remained. He told her that the surveillance operation had been fully dismantled, every file, every record. He told her the name of the attorney who had overseen the destruction of the records, in case she wanted to verify it independently. She wrote the name down. At the end of the call, she said, "Same time in 2 weeks." "Yes," he said. And then, "Thank you for calling." "I said I would," she said. "I do what I say." "I know," he said. "That's one of the things I'm learning to do." She ended the call and sat in the studio for a while in the quiet, with the smell of eucalyptus and cold air, and her hands resting on the work table that she had built herself 3 years ago from a kit that had taken 2 weekends and several arguments with the assembly instructions. She sat there and she thought about what was coming and what had passed, and the complicated math of building something real with another person, the way it required not just love, which was the part everyone talked about, but the daily, unglamorous decision to choose honesty over comfort, accountability over self-protection, the shown work over the hidden gesture. She was still deciding, she knew that. The deciding was not finished, and she was not going to pretend it was finished because it wasn't, and she was a woman who had learned, through experience she had paid for in full, that pretending things were finished before they were finished was how people ended up back in the same rooms they had tried to leave. But she was calling every 2 weeks, and he was answering. And the calls were getting longer and more honest and less careful, which she thought was probably the right direction. Eliana Kwan was born on a Tuesday in late February in a hospital in Lower Manhattan at 4:47 in the morning when the city outside was doing its closest approximation of quiet. Jaemin was in the waiting room. He had been there for 6 hours. He had not been invited into the room. That was Amar's decision, made calmly and without cruelty 2 months prior, and he had accepted it without argument, which she had noted and which had mattered to her in ways she had not explained to him. Her mother was with her. Della was there for the first 3 hours before falling asleep in a chair with her coat over her lap. Dr. Lim coordinated with the hospital staff with an efficiency that meant Amara was able to focus entirely on the physical reality of what was happening to her body, which was enormous and consuming and left no room for anything except the work of it. When the nurse came out to the waiting room, Jaemin stood up before she had crossed half the distance to him. He was in the same clothes he had arrived in, a dark sweater and trousers, his coat folded over the back of the chair beside him because he had taken it off 3 hours in when the waiting room got warm. He looked like a man who had not moved much for 6 hours but whose interior had been in constant motion. The nurse said, "You can come in now." He walked down the hall with his hands at his sides and his steps measured. He stopped outside the door and stood there for a moment with his hand against the frame, not pushing it open, just standing there. The nurse went in first and he followed. Amara was in the bed and she looked like someone who had just come back from somewhere very far away, exhausted in a way that was also somehow complete, the exhaustion of a thing finished rather than a thing ongoing. Her mother was beside her, and her mother looked at Jaemin when he came in with the careful, measuring look of a woman reserving judgment based on evidence she was still collecting. He met her eyes steadily and nodded once, and she returned the nod with a fraction less reservation than before. Then he looked at Amara, and he looked at what she was holding, and he stopped walking. Eliana was 7 pounds and a few ounces, and entirely new in the way that new human beings are, the way that makes every other thing in the room temporarily irrelevant, the way that reorganizes the scale of things without asking permission. She was asleep, with her face pressed against Amara's chest, and her hands fisted up near her chin, and she had Amara's forehead, and the particular set of Jaemin's jaw softened into something that had not yet learned to be hard. "Come here," Amara said. Her voice was rough with the night's work. He came to the side of the bed, and he stood there, and he looked at Eliana the way people look at things that undo them, carefully, because the undoing is in progress, and they are trying to stay upright through it. "Do you want to hold her?" Amara said. He looked at her. He checked her face for the offer, making sure it was a real offer and not a performed one. He had learned in the months of bi-weekly phone calls to check rather than assume. She looked back at him evenly. It was a real offer. He sat down in the chair beside the bed, and Amara transferred Eliana into his arms with the careful economy of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, and he received the 7 pounds of his daughter with hands that were not steady. For the first time in as long as he could remember, his hands were not steady. He held Eliana against his chest, and he looked down at her face, and the unhardened version of his jaw and the expression on his face was not anything he had constructed or calibrated. It was entirely outside his control, which he had not experienced as a sensation since he was 19 years old and making the decision in a basement in Queens that would define the next 20 years. Amara watched him. She watched him with her hands folded in her lap and her mother beside her, and the early morning coming gray through the window, and she thought about everything she was still deciding and everything that had not been resolved and everything that would require more months and more conversations and more days of choosing honesty over comfort. And she thought about a man standing in a gravel driveway in the rain, saying, "I will stand here until you're ready." She had not made a final decision. She was going to keep doing what she had been doing, moving carefully, with her eyes open, letting the evidence accumulate before she drew conclusions. That was not romantic, but it was real. And she had decided somewhere in the 6 hours of that waiting room night that real was the only currency she was interested in anymore. But she watched him hold their daughter with trembling hands in the early gray morning, and she allowed herself to note, quietly and without drama, that the evidence was trending in a particular direction. Jaemin looked up from Eliana's face and found Amara already looking at him. They held the look for a moment, everything in it, all of it, the gala and the cabin and the highway and the study and the months and the calls and the unfinished deciding. And then Eliana made a sound, a small preliminary sound of a person considering whether to wake up, and they both looked down at her at the same time. He bent his head slightly toward the child. She watched him do it. Outside, the city began to surface from its closest approximation of quiet into the particular gray noise of early morning. Traffic building on the avenues, the first light separating from the dark above the East River. A Tuesday in late February becoming itself one cold second at a time. Inside the room, 3 people sat in the particular stillness that follows the end of a long storm, not yet sure of the weather ahead, but alive, intact, present to it. They had not arrived anywhere permanent. Amara understood that clearly. The road behind them was damaged in ways that would take years to fully assess, and the road ahead required a quality of daily effort that could not be promised in advance and could only be demonstrated one choice at a time. But they were in the same room, and the child between them was breathing steadily. And Amara Bellamy, who had driven 9 hours alone through the night carrying a secret that had felt like it would break her, had not been broken. She had bent badly in several directions. She had been lied to and surveilled and maneuvered and frightened. She had made the wrong call once, picking up the phone on the highway, and the right call immediately after. She had walked into a room full of men with organized power, and she had stood at a whiteboard, and she had drawn the map that ended it. She had done every piece of that on her own terms and in her own order, and she had not let grief or anger or fear make the decisions that only her own clear head was qualified to make. That was not a small thing. She had learned, in these past months, that it was not a small thing. Jaemin looked up again from Eliana. He looked at Amara and he opened his mouth slightly, as though preparing to say something, and then he closed it again. Not suppressing. She could read the difference now, not swallowing something down, just deciding that whatever it was could wait, that they were in a moment that did not need language added to it. She agreed. She leaned back against the pillow and closed her eyes and let the morning come in through the window and listened to her daughter breathe.